So we've all seen the Brooklyn Bridge before, maybe from Gossip Girl, if you're into that. I, of course, am not because it's a show for teenage girls, but this absolute behemoth made from men's blood, sweat, and tears has a pretty crazy backstory. So let's dive in, but preferably not from the top of the Brooklyn Bridge, because that would be suicidal. It all started in the year 1841 when a man named John Roebling was making waves in the bridge building community with his new innovative technology. John A. Roebling and Sons Company, real clever name, clever girl, were the first to identify a major issue with modern suspension bridges. It's that the cables sucked. So him and his sons, I imagine from the John A. Roebling and Sons Company, were like, yo, this steel stuff is pretty cool. What if we made rope out of this? And they did. So him and his sons decided to start making steel cable that would be used in lots and lots of fields. Let me tell you, it was so practical. Now fast forward to 1852, and Roebling, most likely his sons with company, are traveling across the East River to Brooklyn when they suddenly get stuck in ice. Unfortunately, Stepbro was nowhere to be found, so he started drafting up a plan that would make the commute much easier. He said, hey sons and company, what if we used our cables to build a bridge across the East River from Brooklyn to Manhattan? And by 1857, he had a plan in place that he took to the city for approval. Unfortunately, there were a lot of bumps in the road. Get it? Because it's a freaking bridge and there's bumps in the road, but usually there's not bumps on bridges. Anyway, there were a couple things that got in the way of the project coming to fruition. First off, there was depression going on, and secondly, the Civil fucking War. Ever fucking heard of it? But in 1869, the New York Bridge Company, led by chief engineer and our boy, John Roebling, was granted permission to start the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. But don't celebrate yet, there's still a long road ahead. Get it? Anyway, I'm sure you can imagine the conditions in which these men worked were absolutely heinous. They started by sinking a giant 25,000 square foot airtight box known as a caisson to the bottom of the East River. Then the men would be sent down and enter the caisson via an airlock system. And by the way, these caissons were made out of wood, which is absolutely insane to me. And once you were in the caisson, it pretty much looked and sounded like this. Yeah, it was pitch black, probably smelled horrible, and there were people dying or coming very close to death pretty regularly. Not to mention in 1869, the leader of the project, John Roebling, who insisted on working beside his men, died from tetanus. Even in a time where jobs were so valuable because the economy was so poor, people were quitting left and right. To combat this, the team raised the wage to an extra $2 a day, and these boys just came running right back. So unfortunately, Roebling's never got to see the bridge's completion, or any of it, really. What a shame. But with Roebling's out of the picture, someone new had to rise to the occasion. Likely someone from Roebling, Sons and Company. Maybe one of Roebling's sons. That's right, Washington Roebling, son of John Roebling, took over the project right where he left off and actually had the same philosophy. He decided to work with his men side by side and often spent days in the caissons. However, in 1872, this caught up to him and he was diagnosed with caisson disease, or the bends, as many of you may know it. You see, back then they didn't really know what would happen to humans when they were exposed to high amounts of pressure. Little did they know that they would actually behave like Aaron Judge during the playoffs. So when we breathe in a pretty substantial amount of nitrogen, and obviously that nitrogen is absorbed into our muscles, our tissues, our organs, our bloodstream. However, when the external pressure outside of our body changes too quickly, that nitrogen forms bubbles, and we basically kind of like boil from the inside out, which is absolutely terrifying. And guess what? Nobody had any idea how this worked in 1872, and they were just raw dogging this every day. Now, it's said that between 30 and 40 people died during the construction of the bridge, and half of those came from pressure sickness. But there were also dozens more who lived and were just left with incurable ailments. And in 1872, our boy Washington Roebling joins that statistic as one of those men. He suffered blindness and paralysis that left him unable to continue the project. Unfortunately, there were no more Roebling sons, but there were some Sons Company left to take on the task. Enter Emily Roebling, Washington Roebling's wife. Now, the bridge is nowhere near complete, and Emily didn't know a thing about bridges other than what she heard her husband speak about. So she took it upon herself to spend countless hours learning about bridge mechanics and mathematics through Washington's notes and other trusty sources. And she was Washington's eyes and ears for the remainder of the project, which wasn't completed for more than 10 years after he was decommissioned. Now, fast forward to 1883, and she actually did everything right. Who would have thought? A woman. But she was praised for this. In the paper, she was called the bridge's heroine, was actually the first person to cross the bridge holding a golden rooster as a sign of good luck. The fun did not last long, though. The bridge officially opened to the public a few days after Emily's crossing, and it was a shit show. So over 20,000 people piled onto the bridge during a packed Memorial Day celebration, and unfortunately, nobody understood how bridges worked and how they kind of naturally sway, you know? So the bridge did what it does. It swayed, and everyone naturally freaks the freak out and trample over each other, killing over a dozen people. And even a year later, skeptics were still nervous to go on the bridge after what happened, so a local circus was commissioned for a publicity stunt. On May 17, 1884, nearly 1 year after the incident, P.T. Barnum led a parade of 21 elephants across the bridge, and it swayed, just like the public, back in favor of the bridge's safety. And everyone lived happily ever after. I love telling this story because I think it's important to care about the people you love and what they're passionate about. Not only that, but no matter how tough you are, like sometimes you just gotta take a step back, you know, let someone else take the reins in order to cross the finish line. Make sure to tell this story to someone who you know doesn't like you as a way of proving how much smarter you are than them. If it results in a fist fight, then so be it, I guess. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment what your favorite fart smell is. See you in the next one.